Every minute of the day, on average, 20 people are displaced from their homes, forced to flee because of war, community violence, or persecution. Those numbers add up quickly. Right now, there are more than 65 million displaced people around the world. The UN says that's an unprecedented surge of refugees and internally displaced people. If ever there was a time for people of goodwill to get together to find solutions, it's now.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
In the March edition of Signs of the Times magazine, we get a very vivid impression of what it's like to visit a Rohingya refugee camp just inside the border of Bangladesh. To explore this further, I caught up with aid worker Robert Patton on the phone. He works with ADRA, the Adventist Development and Relief Agency, particularly in the area of emergency management.
I was last in Bangladesh about 10 days ago and went out to a couple of the camps that ADRA is working in. And this particular camp is literally right on the border. It's within probably 1 kilometre of the river that defines the border between Bangladesh and Myanmar. I was involved with the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh in two roles. One was as the emergency response coordinator on the ground in Bangladesh towards the beginning of our response there. And then when I've not been filling that role, I've been working as the regional emergency coordinator to ensure that we have coordination of ADRA's global resources for the support of the response to the needs of the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh. Under the coordination that's being done in Bangladesh with regard to the response to the Rohingya refugee crisis, ADRA has some specific roles that's been allocated to them. One of the biggest roles is that there are two refugee camps where in total there is 12,000 households. There's about 5 persons per household, so that's 60,000 people.
Wow.
ADRA is actually managing the camp, where they liaise with the organisations that are working there and coordinate within that camp, liaise with the government, liaise with the UN services as well. And then within those camps, ADRA is providing specifically emergency shelter.
Yeah.
This is a bamboo framework with tarpaulins over it. And in the next 3 months, ADRA is specifically providing 10,000 of those.
Wow.
There's also coming up a cyclone and monsoon season, so ADRA is working hard to strengthen other buildings or other shelters as well against the rains and cyclones that could come. ADRA is also doing what we call site improvements within those camps. This is putting in pathways, roadways, building bridges, putting fences in to protect around water sources, and putting drainage canals in. There's also what we call risk reduction that is being done, and so ADRA is working within those camps for evacuation routes, how they will manage if a fire broke out. I think you can imagine what it would be like with all these closely packed in, tents or essentially, temporary shelters, and all their cooking is done over fires. So there is a high risk there. So we're working with the communities to look at how we can actually reduce the risk, and then if a fire does happen, how we can actually manage that as well. So this is giving a little bit of an insight into some of the things that ADRA is doing in those camps, especially two specific camps with a total population of 60,000 people, taking on a very, very strong role of managing those camps for those people to provide the best services possible for them.
Boy, it just makes you realise, how much we take for granted that, that we have all this basic infrastructure, provided in our communities. But if you're living, basically out in the bush somewhere, out in a paddock somewhere, then all these basics have to be provided somewhere, somehow.
That's right. I mean, you look at, a basic essential of life is water. You do not have, piped water to every dwelling. You've got stand pipes, basically, and people are queuing every day with their containers to collect some water to take back to their home. You've then got to look at the facility of bathrooms and waste from that. And when you look at those sheer numbers again, there was nothing there basically 6 months ago. Suddenly you're having to create those services for 1 million people essentially.
Yeah, and then when you add like you said, the risk of floods to that, open latrines plus floods, you're basically looking at, well, there goes your clean water, aren't you, really?
Essentially, that's it. And so we're looking at putting bore wells, and I mean that's primarily what we're doing to tap into deep sources of water, and then protecting those bore wells to ensure that they're not contaminated in any way.
Now, let's just backtrack a little bit, because I guess, we hear about the Rohingya issue, on the news and things like that, and sometimes it's just assumed that we all know what it's about, but I guess the roots of it go back quite a while. Why are Rohingya people running from Myanmar? Like, what's going on for them there?
Essentially, there's been a change in the security situation for them, and essentially they are leaving the country to protect themselves and their family. And this has been happening over the last probably 25 years, but this has been the largest exodus, and it's really just to do with the scale and enormity of the security situation within Myanmar.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Okay. So I guess there's been a significant change of government in Myanmar, but it seems that no matter what the government lately, there is always seems to be an issue with ethnic and religious minorities in Myanmar. And I know it's difficult for you to comment on that, because ADRA, of course, works with governments of all stripes, needing to focus on the needs of people rather than taking a political stand. That must be difficult on some occasions.
It is, but the core approach of ADRA is that we apply the humanitarian principles, which basically is that people who are in need and who are refugees, there's what we call the humanitarian imperative, which is that they have the right to assistance. There's also neutrality, which is where ADRA as an organisation, which is the humanitarian arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, that we take a neutral approach. It does not take into account politics, religious aspects, or any racial components there at all. ADRA will just help anyone, basically, and will not take any sides at all. And there's the impartiality, which is, if anyone's in need, we provide it to those who are in the greatest need.
Okay, so this would explain why the Rohingya, for example, are a Muslim minority group, and ADRA, obviously, as you said, is an arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But regardless of the religious differences, you guys are blind to that. You're there to help.
That's correct. I mean, it comes down to that basic humanitarian principle. They're a human being, they're in need, and we will be there to assist and support them as required.
Okay, fair enough. Now, we hear these terrible stories from not just Bangladesh, but around the world about refugees being stuck in refugee camps for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, generations. What is going on with that? Can you explain to us how the system is supposed to work and what the bottlenecks are in that system that leave people in limbo in those sort of situations for so long?
Essentially, for someone to become a refugee, they need to cross a border into another country, and primarily it's usually because they are seeking safety, security for themselves and for their family as well. Once they enter that country, in most instances, they are essentially illegally entering that country, but those countries that they enter, if they're a signatory to a code of conduct under the United Nations, where they actually will agree to protect those people based on the premise that it is not safe for them to go back where they came from, and so they will then continue to at least provide them a safe environment within the country that they have gone to. Until the situation's either resolved in the country that they left, or they maybe make a move to another country that accepts them as a refugee but brings them in and then adopts them, if you like, or takes them on as citizens of the new country.
That's what we call resettlement, isn't it?
It is indeed, yes.
Okay, so while there are a lot of countries in the world where there are refugees living in refugee camps, there are only a handful of countries, aren't there, like including places like Australia, New Zealand, Canada, the United States, where refugees are actually permanently settled with the aim of becoming new citizens in those countries. Is the fact that there are so few countries offering resettlement one reason why people wait so long in these camps?
It is the limited number of people that are, limited countries that are providing that resettlement program, but it's also that there are limitations on the numbers that those countries accept. And so Australia, for example, will have a target maximum number. New Zealand, Canada, the same, where there will be a maximum number that they will take in any 1 year. The other thing that slows the process down somewhat is the fact that there has to be proof, if you like, that they are indeed a true refugee, that there is, they cannot go back to their country of origin because of safety concerns and fear for their life, basically. And that has to be clearly shown so that a country that then takes them for resettlement is confident that this is meeting a very real need for them.
Okay. So the situation of the Rohingya in particular, are they? What is it about their situation that, like having been there quite recently, as you said, what do you see about their situation that is perhaps quite unique to what we might see elsewhere in the world, or is it simply another variety of the same thing we see anywhere?
What could be seen as unique? It's not only just the Rohingya, but they are sort of. It's unique to them is the fact that they do not hold citizenship or do not have citizenship in any country. Myanmar, where they came from, did not recognise them, and of course they are not recognised within Bangladesh because they have no citizenship. They've been termed by the UN as the most friendless people in the world. There are no friends for them. They have no citizenship. They have no rights anywhere in any country. And that makes a unique situation for them.
Wow. So are they receiving a unique response then from the United Nations or from countries that do provide resettlement services, or are they stuck in limbo in that sense as well?
The UN will be working and advocates that we need to look at, how can they get citizenship. This is a complicated, situation, and one that I think we resolve quickly, and especially when you look at the sheer numbers of the Rohingya that are currently seeking refuge within Bangladesh.
What kind of numbers are we looking at?
There were already somewhere in the region of about 200,000 that were been living for some period of time within Bangladesh, and since the latest flow of people started, which was in late August last year, there's been about 850,000 more, so that takes it to just over 1 million Rohingya that are now in Bangladesh.
Goodness me, so that's like the population of Adelaide, isn't it, really?
It is, and when you think the majority of those arrived in the space of about a 4-month period, and they came with nothing. They arrived with literally just clothes on their back, and that was it. And so there has to be a response that meets the basic human needs, which is emergency shelter, food, and water. Of course, there's a lot more than that. There's then also education that you need to look at. You need to look at the health services for those people. And there needs to be some form of psychosocial support for them as well, because they've been through a very traumatic time.
Sure. And I guess ADRA is one of those organisations that's helping to provide that suite of services?
Yes. ADRA is providing a specific group of services, if you like, for them, and in specific locations. The actual response is well managed and coordinated by UN agency, the UNHCR, and so there's it avoids duplication and avoids also gaps in the services, and so ADRA's working within that coordination.
Okay, and does it work well, like having the UN and I imagine some government agencies in Bangladesh and a whole lot of NGOs such as yourself all working together? Is that a difficult sort of thing to coordinate it?
I believe that it works well, and one of the main reasons is that the system that we're using is actually a global response mechanism that's used elsewhere, and it's not new to any aid organisation that's working in the area. And so everyone does tend to work together, follow what is an established way of approaching this for coordination, and there's very, very good communication between the agencies, and then with feeding that into the overall coordination. And generally speaking, it works extremely well, and it is working well in the case of the response to meet the needs of the Rohingya refugees.
Wow, that's really good to hear. And I understand ADRA is also working with refugees in other parts of the world, Syria and Iraq. What about Africa, like around the Congo and places like that, where there's been a refugee issues for decades now?
Yes, ADRA is certainly working in those areas. In actual fact, ADRA over the last 3 years has altogether worked with refugees and IDPs, and just to differentiate with the IDPs, which is internally displaced persons, they're people who have had to flee within their own country, have been displaced in their own country, and have not crossed a border into another country, which is what then defines a refugee. So ADRA has been working with both internally displaced and people who have crossed borders in 39 countries over the last 3 years.
Wow, 39. That must mean that ADRA is basically working with the majority of the places in the world where there is a significant refugee issue right now.
That's correct. There's a range of services from the immediate needs of people who have just left where they are and are in immediate need, through to programs that then resettle them either into a new country for them, or resettling them back into the country that they've come from, but working with that group of people who have been displaced in 39 countries in total.
Okay, so ADRA also helps people with resettlement in, like you say, either new countries where they end up, or returning back to their original country once wars or famines or other issues have died down.
Yes, most definitely. And in Australia, ADRA actually has assists with a resettlement program there in Melbourne. This is with Sudanese refugees who have been resettled into Australia. And so ADRA has a specific program there where they're working with the youth to assist them to integrate into society there. And there are actually details on that program on ADRA Australia's website.
Okay, which is adra.org.au, if I've got that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Now, over the last, probably 10 or 15 years, Robert, we've seen a sort of hardening in attitude, towards refugees. I guess as the numbers of them have increased in some parts of the world, there seems to be a fair degree of prejudice. So I guess ADRA personnel, working closely with those refugees, obviously you're going to see the good, the bad, and the ugly in that sense. You're going to sort of understand the system a bit better. What's your sense of how ADRA workers come away from those experiences feeling about the refugee issue and about the refugees they come across?
It is deeply affecting to any ADRA worker to work in those environments. And I guess that's mitigated to some extent by the fact that you've actually been working to assist and help those people. But it is challenging to see what in all instances are innocent people who, due to means beyond their, reason beyond their control, have been forced to leave, their home where they've been living. It separates families, separates friends, support networks have gone, and so it is challenging to work in those environments, but ADRA has very strong programs that, come together to ensure that those needs of people are met. And essentially, a refugee, they're a human being the same as any of us, and what we're looking at is, a place of safety, a place of security, somewhere where you've got a future, and that's what ADRA's trying to do is, create that sort of environment along with other organisations as well.
Mm. So you personally, Robert, when you confront, a large refugee camp, just sort of that seems to be everywhere you look, or or when you sit down with people and you hear their heartrending stories about, family members killed in front of them, what they've had to go through in leaving their home and everything they have behind, crossing borders, braving all sorts of dangers and traumas. How do you cope?
That's a good question. Essentially, it is, first of all, understanding and knowing about the environment and what has caused it, and in that way, through that understanding, you can better, apply yourself. It is, I've got to be careful that I don't become immune to it. As humanitarian aid workers, we need to always have that empathy within us to be able to assist. There are ways that, for me personally, that I do manage that. Yes, I'm working hard, long hours. I have to take a bit of time of, recreation also within that for myself.
Sure.
Staying connected to my family at home is a great way of doing things as well. We can talk through things. It's also being part of a team, and we support each other. We get to know each other, and we work together. And so that also helps to alleviate those sort of stresses that you face when you're working in an environment like that. It's important to, think of what I said earlier about some form of recreation. You've got to get your rest as well. You need to have your breaks. So we always work within the ADRA to ensure that our staff are, have a balance somewhat. They're working very long days, multiple sort of days at a stretch. But we do our best to ensure that there is support for them to get a break as well.
Great. Well, yeah, look, that must be tough, but it's good to hear that, there's a high level of awareness amongst, aid workers with ADRA, that you're there to support one another, you're there to debrief with one another and keep an eye out for each other and say, hey, maybe it's time you took a break for a while, or, how long since you had a couple of weeks home with your family. Wow, incredible stuff. I really appreciate you sharing this with us, Robert. Where are you off to next?
From here, I'll be heading to Thailand. The primary purpose of that visit in Bangkok is to meet with regional agencies. For instance, I'll be meeting with a number of UN agencies, a number of donor officers, and this is really at the regional level to ensure that we maintain a good relationship with them. We look at opportunities of how we can actually work together in partnership. And so they're sort of at a higher level than at the country office level for a lot of these agencies.
Okay, fair enough. Now, obviously, you're sort of in the field and doing training and this sort of thing. So, I don't know how aware you are of the donations and marketing side of things, but what's your understanding as to how ADRA is supported in terms of its finances?
I'll be honest with you, I don't know a lot about sort of, the streams of income, shall we say.
Sure.
But what I can tell you is there are generous people out there.
Mm-hmm.
ADRA is able to continue to work, but there's never enough. There's always a greater need. And so, I do encourage people to provide support for the work that ADRA is doing, because it is, as we've identified, with just the sheer number of countries that ADRA is working in with refugees alone, gives an idea of the resources that are required by ADRA to be able to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess obviously there are governments out there who are providing grants to provide particular projects here and there, but I mean, my understanding, as I've had contact with ADRA people, is that yes, while the grants are there, the donations from the public are really essential and hugely appreciated. Right now, for example, ADRA Australia is running a special appeal aimed at the Rohingya issue, where you can help out as our listeners to provide food and shelter kits and other emergency and everyday supplies that they basically don't have there, to help those refugees there in the refugee camps in Bangladesh. The website to check out to find out more about that and to make your donation is adra.org.au/Rohingya, which is spelled ROHINGYA. You can also call 1-800-242-372 to make your donation. That number again, 1800 242 372. And I'm sure Adra would really appreciate your support. So yeah, thanks again so much, Robert, for the time that you've spent with us today, and all the best with your work. And God bless as you make a difference in the world.
Thank you, and look, I appreciate the opportunity for you guys to share a little bit about what Adra is doing, and I do ask for the prayers of people. That's extremely important. And I also think it's important that people inform themselves about what has happened in this world, because there may be some way that they can assist, and of course there is the donations that have to be made to Adra.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Signs of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit signsofthetimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.